Good evening, all. I'd like to welcome you to the Community Engaged Research Lecture for 2018. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for joining us this evening for the 23rd Community Engaged Research Lecture and Award presentation. This is hosted by the UNM Office of the Vice Provost for Research, and we will tonight honor a terrific colleague, Dr. Sally Davis. Just a quick introduction. I'm a professor of sociology at UNM. Am I speaking loudly enough? You can hear me? Great. I'm a professor of sociology at UNM. I'm currently serving as the interim senior vice provost and interim provost in the university. And yes, that's too many job titles for anybody. I'm only the interim provost for about another week, and then President Abdallah comes back down as provost, and I will go back down as senior vice. Tonight's topic is very beloved to me. I'm a practitioner of community engaged research myself. It's been the heart of much of my work in sociology, and I know I'm in an outstanding company this evening with a bunch of beloved colleagues very committed to this kind of work, none more so than Dr. Davis. Tonight is an opportunity for the university to demonstrate the high value that we place on community-engaged research and creative activity, which captures research that engages faculty in academically relevant work that simultaneously meets UNM's mission and goals, as well as community goals and priorities. Tonight's award recognizes the exceptional scholarly work that embodies UNM's commitment to community engagement and profoundly and systematically affects the community and the relationship between the university and the larger community in positive and often meaningful ways. Tonight we celebrate the achievements of Professor Sally Davis, Division Chief of Prevention and Population Sciences, Director of the Prevention Research Center, and Professor of Pediatrics and Family and Community Medicine at UNM Health Sciences. As part of tonight's program, we'll get a glimpse of Professor Davis's exemplary work and then present her with the university's highest honor for community-engaged scholarship. We look forward to your lecture, Dr. Davis, on the fundamentals of translating prevention science into practice, bridging the gap through community academic partnerships. And before I welcome Dr. Davis to the stage, I do want to quickly introduce the new Director of Academic Community Engagement at UNM, Dr. Monica Kowal in the front row. She's just been appointed. I had the honor of appointing her in my brief 2-month stint as interim provost, and she'll be serving in the next years to coordinate academic community engagement across the university, including UNM's application for to be named a Carnegie Community Engaged University. So, I would now like to welcome to the stage Dr. Robert Williams, Distinguished Professor of Family and Community Medicine, who will be introducing our lecturer this evening. Dr. Williams.
Good evening. I am Robert Williams, and I'm a member of the Department of Family and Community Medicine. As Professor Wood mentioned, I feel honored to be able to participate in introducing Professor Davis for tonight's presentation and award. I often feel very fortunate to live here in New Mexico. Our state's cultural diversity, its mountainous views, our beautiful sunsets, the wide vistas, and the wonderful food are just a few of the things that I really treasure about New Mexico. And I'm sure that many of you could add to that list and probably describe it better than I do. At the same time, life here in New Mexico can be challenging. The challenges, however, have bred for many a strength and resilience among those who have lived here for generations. And that strength and resilience and the associated cultures have created a way of life that is built on health and well-being as well as mutual strength and respect. There is no question, though, that these challenges, when blended with the influences of our broader culture, can be amplified and lead into the type of health problems that have afflicted the broader population across our country. Poverty, geographic access barriers, and limited options can increase the risk for health problems for many in our state. Appropriate and effective steps here in New Mexico to mitigate these impacts must take into account the sources of strength and resilience, as well as the challenges that are facing our communities. We cannot expect to improve the health of those living in communities across New Mexico simply by applying lessons learned elsewhere without adapting and improving those lessons to the cultures and circumstances of our communities. We here at UNM are fortunate to have a number of people whose careers have focused on the process of creating partnerships with communities to advance health. We can count among our faculty national and internationally recognized experts in community-based and community-partnered programs to improve health. I'm really very pleased that this award today recognizes one of those outstanding and widely recognized experts, Professor Davis. While some of our experts have focused on their work on processes of communication and power dynamics in partnering with communities, Professor Davis has focused her work over the years on bringing the benefits of best scientific evidence on health promotion to communities around the state, all the while using culturally appropriate approaches and incorporating real-life circumstances in New Mexico. This is not easy work. First and foremost, it requires building trust with those in communities with whom you might partner. Following in the footsteps of those with whom these communities have interacted in years past can sometimes make this a steep climb. This brings me to the personal qualities that I feel Professor Davis has brought to this work over the years. And those are her dedication, her insightfulness, her persistence, skill, enthusiasm, and scientific knowledge. Throughout her career, Professor Davis has been a champion for children and families living in low-income, geographically isolated communities with limited access to resources and services. As a champion and innovative leader, she has opened the door for many others to follow. Her work has been truly extraordinary. She has developed innovative programs in, for instance, care of Native American teens, prevention of obesity in preschoolers in rural and underserved communities, reduction of risk for diabetes in rural communities, increasing Native American students' interest in future STEM careers, all in partnerships with communities. Her scholarly work is widely respected by state policymakers and community members and by the CDC and NIH, and her results have been widely published in respected journals. Nationally, she is known for her leadership and scholarly work using community partnerships to advance the health of under-resourced communities. She's known for designing and implementing intervention strategies that are culturally, geographically, and economically appropriate. She's used a community-based participatory research approach in her research and other work long before it became popular, understanding that inclusion of participants in every aspect of a study is both ethically and mutually beneficial, period. I hope that she will provide us in her remarks, and I trust that she will, with examples of some of the work that she has done over the years. So I'll not take more time to describe it in detail. However, before we invite her up to the stage, I would like to say that I believe that Dr. Davis's value to the University of New Mexico and the state of New Mexico lies in the fact that she is an innovator, a risk taker, a visionary, and a persistent champion for the health of communities in New Mexico. She has changed the way people think about research in communities and the way communities think about research. Thank you.
Yat A. She Teresa Clay, Ashihansha, Todichini A. Bashichin, Nastasia Deshiche, Kiani Deshanele. Good evening, everybody. My name is Teresa Clay. I work with the Indian Health Service Health Promotion Disease Prevention Program for the Albuquerque area. And I'm happy to be here to support, celebrate, and embrace Dr. Sally Davis's life contributions to public health in New Mexico, nationally, and abroad. She has been an influential leader implementing new initiatives and developing models while mentoring new and current health professionals as myself. Sally has been an inspiration to me over the many years that I've known her and worked with her. She mentored me in my career field of health and wellness in Native communities, and it's an honor to be here with her. I believe Dr. Sally Davis has made a major impact, and she deserves the prestigious Community Engaged Research Lectureship Award for her lifetime contributions to public health, education, and research. So it's my honor to introduce Dr. Sally Davis. Thank you.
Let's see if that does it. I think so. We're not going to use that one, so don't worry about that. Good. Thank you. So I want to start with thanking a whole lot of people, but I want to start by thanking the university. This award is a wonderful opportunity to showcase the importance of community-engaged research. I think it's on the forefront of doing that. I attended a think tank at a well-known university on the East Coast where faculty were talking about how do we get the university to recognize working with communities. And this university is ahead of the game, and so I want to start by thanking the university. We're fortunate to be a part of this academic institution that does recognize the value of researchers and communities working together for mutually beneficial results. I also want to thank some of those who made this possible for me to be standing here getting this award, representing all of you, all the people I've worked with all these years, all the communities. So the award may have my name on it, but it has all of your names and our hearts with it. Dr. Martha McGrew, Dean of the School of Medicine, Professor Gabriel Lopez, Vice President for Research at UNM, Professor David Hanson, Chair of the Faculty Senate Research Policy Committee, Provost Richard Wood, and members of the selection committee. So thank you to all of those people, and of course to Rob Williams and Teresa Clay for the wonderful, I was in tears before Teresa finished, so I'm going to try not to choke up during my presentation. I also want to thank some people that are behind the scenes, literally behind the scenes. So Lauren Madrano, Vanessa Tan, Kathleen Schmidt from the UNM Office of the Vice President of Research, and Steve Carr from the University Communication and Marketing, who made all this happen, put it all together, did all the behind the scenes work, running around, last minute changes and details, and dealing with me during that time. And I'm honored that all of you came out. It's wonderful to see old friends and to see some new people and meet some new people and colleagues and people from communities, as well as people that I have worked with over the years. And I do hope that you will stay for the reception. They have put together a wonderful reception, some really good food, and you'll get to hear the magic guitar of Arturo Montoya, and I think you'll enjoy that. But be sure to introduce yourself to to each other, and especially to the people that work at the Prevention Research Center, and ask them about their work, because that work is the same work that I'm doing. They're just not up here tonight, but they're doing the same work in communities across the state. And I'm going to be using we a lot in my presentation, because it is about us, and it's hard for me to say I, because it wasn't I. It was we, either we and the community, or we and the research team, or we and the participants in the project. The goal of my talk today is to describe how community engagement and prevention science are natural partners. I will do that by describing the fundamentals of prevention science and community engagement. So the first part of the lecture is a lecture. I don't like doing those as well as I do the fun part of what the projects are about. And then I will present 3 case examples from work of ours from the past. And I will point out when I'm presenting those case studies things about how the community was engaged and what the underlying scientific theories or approaches are. Pointing out how the elements from community engagement and from prevention science were integrated into the specific study. I will also give some theoretical underpinnings and research approaches and strategies. And for some of you, this may be new, and for some of you, it's not new at all, but maybe there'll be something to refresh what you already know. And I hope you'll go away with some new ideas about community-engaged scholarship. So with that, I will start the slide presentation. And I want to say that on the slide presentation, I was chatting with some people the other day, and they said, well, I was saying, the hardest part of it is knowing where to start. I've been at this a long time, and presenting what am I going to talk about? And so the person said, an esteemed person in leadership here at the Health Sciences Center, said, we'll just start at the beginning. So I thought I'd start at the beginning. I'm really not going to, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, I promise you. But there is a long road that we will talk about. So the overview of the lecture is I'll do a little bit about prevention science, a little bit about community engaged research from my point of view. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Prevention Research Center. That's the ad. Put the ad in there in the middle. 3 examples, so Pathways, Chile, and Viva Connects. And then we'll have a short video in their own words, so someone from the community, some people from the community are going to share with you about one of their projects. And then I'll talk a little bit about bridging the gap, translation and research to practice. Because if we don't translate it into practice, it just sits on the shelf. And that's not benefiting the researchers, and it's certainly not benefiting the communities. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So this long road, and I see someone in the audience, Lance Chilton, who, if you look real close, you might see him at the beginning of that road, because 40 years when I came here, that's who brought me here. And he's sitting in the audience, and so I was delighted to see him. But I'm not going to go from 40 years of projects and studies and working with communities. But I have to tell one, I promised that I wouldn't get off on a lot of side stories, but there is one for this. Senator Bingaman was really a proponent of community-based research and school health and working with communities. And he came to our center, and we did a show presentation, and I had this slide because this is one of my favorite slides, because if I've seen these roads, I've seen them 100 times, 1,000 times. And so I had this, and he said, are those the San Juan Mountains? And I said, well, I think so. And he said, couldn't you have found some mountains in New Mexico to have for your main slide? And so I always, every time I use this, I think of Senator Bingaman being disappointed that I had used Colorado's mountains for my slide. So prevention science, there was a time not very long ago when NIH did not have an office of prevention or prevention science. And now they have not only have an office, they have a group of people that are coming up with definitions of what prevention science is and actually calling it science. So I think we've come a long way during the time that I've been involved in this. But this is one of the definitions that the committee out of the Office of the Director, and I will say that David Murray, who is the director of the Office of Prevention Science at NIH, was our statistician on the Pathways Project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Pathways Project. And I know Teresa remembers David well. David, it was by the book statistics. And so sometimes that didn't exactly work with the group. Developing interventions and doing studies to develop and evaluate disease prevention and health promotion recommendations and public health programs. So that's the definition. And I think the categories are more helpful. So assessment of risk, including genetics, development of methods for screening, development of evaluation of interventions, translation of prevention interventions into practice. That's one that you're going to hear me talk a lot about. Effectiveness studies that examine factors related to organization, management, financing, adoption of prevention practices and services, and methodological and statistical procedures for assessing risk and measuring the effects of prevention interventions. So that's a category. So now we're going to move a little bit, and I'm going to give a short history of prevention. So at one time, it was all about infectious diseases. So sanitation, immunizations, all of that was what was in prevention. And then the changing pattern of diseases, infectious to lifestyle, changed our whole field about the way we do prevention. It's not about immunizations, although I've heard actually, heard Eli Duryea used to call it immunization against whatever the risk factors were, although it was metaphorically used. Recognizing that risk factors influence survival and quality of life. I'm sure most of you have heard of the Framingham study, which when they started looking at, well, blood pressure, hypertension was a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and started putting together risk factors and lifestyle with the actual outcome of disease. Shift in emphasis to enhancing behaviors such as diet and activity that wasn't focused on in the past until recent years. And then a shift to surrounding environment. And the past director, one of the past directors, they're changing a few times these last couple of months, but at the CDC used to say healthy by default. You don't eat healthy food if there's no healthy food to be had. You don't exercise if there's no place to exercise. You don't live healthy behaviors if you're not in an environment and it's not available to you. So big shift in the last few years to environment and policy. We'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about the case studies. Enacting policies and laws as prevention. So seatbelts, one of the first ones. Tobacco informed us enormously about policy, about tax and advertising on television and all the different things that came out of prevention of tobacco use. Viewing health in a broader context. It's not just focused, and I'm going to give you more information on that when I show one of the models. Multidisciplinary team approach, team science. So a big change from the researcher being in his or her office doing the research to being a team. And that's what we do at the PRC, and also with community. And then community engaged. And community engagement approaches have sort of come and gone. It's experiencing a renaissance now, I think, with really understanding it more and how important it is. So the factors, this is one of the things that have brought about these changes. The factors that influence your chances of surviving to age 65, look at this real closely. So lifestyle, those are preventable kinds of things. Heredity, not so much. Environment, we're now seeing that changing the environment. I'm not talking just about pollution and climate and those kind of things. I'm talking about environment that has to do with can you walk safely across the street to get to a sidewalk that you can walk on? Is there a grocery store that sells food that you want to serve your family? And then the medical care system is a smaller percentage of that. So this slide is a really important one. I'm sure that those of you in public health have seen this many, many, many times, but it's a real important one. So I'm going to just go through a list. There's a lot of theories and approaches, and you sort of use them as needed, and I'll be showing you the few that I think are the most in congruence with community engaged research. So community engaged approach is one of the approaches. It's not a theory, but it's an approach. Social cognitive theory, trans-theoretical model, motivational interviewing, health belief model, socio-ecological model. I'm going to talk a lot about that the rest of the talk. Diffusion, dissemination, implementation. Ev Rogers, who has now passed but used to be here at UNM and did work with us at the center and was in the communications department, wrote many books and papers, scholarly work on diffusion of innovations. And it's gone a whole step further in that dissemination and implementation, a more conscious, planned approach than diffusion, which can happen whether you're having anything to do with it or not. And then implementation science. So this is a socio-ecological model, and I am going to attempt to use the pointer. So we used to just talk about this. And I know there are people in the audience that said, oh yeah, I got those pamphlets, and people said, oh, you shouldn't smoke, you should eat this, don't do this, do this. And so it's still important, knowledge, attitude, and behaviors, but we used to have, someone who worked in the budget office, no longer here, and office was in the basement of one of the buildings. And the building, when you'd walk in, you'd cough because he smoked all day long. And I know that he knew, and I used to use somebody else that was here at the university as that example, but that knowledge is not enough. There are a lot of other things involved. Interpersonal, so family, friends, and networks. And we know that networks have a lot to do with it. Friends, now that we're doing a lot of systems analyses, this plays an important part. So these haven't gone away. They're still there. And then community, the relationship between organizations in a community, and then organizational and social institutions, and policy and enabling environments, national, state, local. These two things have shifted. This is still there, but there's more emphasis on understanding how important the environment is and policy is. And, okay. So shifting paradigms from the individual to population health, interventions that target individuals, families, groups, population, organization, political systems, and the environment. So not just targeting the individual. From research-focused research to community-engaged research. Major, major change and critical for our kind of work. And from a one theory approach to an ecological trans-community approaches. So using more than one approach, integrating approaches. And from anecdotal approach, prevention, and practice to evidence-based, science-based, and best practices. So a really big swing from just kind of thinking, oh, you know, this might work or this might work. Although we still run into a lot of that. In fact, that's one of the major tensions, is some clever idea comes out, no evidence behind it at all, but everybody says, oh, isn't that a great idea? Let's go do that. Pour a lot of money, a lot of energy into it. Okay, and then the last slide on the shifting paradigms. So from going, we haven't done away with this shifting. It just means that one is now getting more attention than the other. But, you know, there's still researchers, a lot of researchers that focus on a small unit of the human body, or a small unit of genetics, or a small unit of something, and a sub-part of a bigger picture. But with community-engaged research and with the kind of work that we do, it's really putting it all together. It's systems, it's expanding. It's from the molecule to the neighborhood. So we're the neighborhood, and it's not just one little thing. And someone used to, when I was giving a talk about one of our projects, and I said, well, this, you change this, and you change this, and you change this. Well, how do you know which one works? Well, it's not which one works, it's the effect of having all of those things working together. So it's a challenging research, to say the least. So it's an integrative thinking, and it's more than the sum of its parts. So community-engaged research is the next piece that I'm going to talk about a little bit, and that is I love this quote, so I put the whole quote in. The opportunity arises for communities and science to work in tandem to ensure a more balanced set of political, social, economic, and cultural priorities, which satisfies the demands of both scientific research and communities. So it's not a dichotomy, it's putting it together, and that's a quote from Hatch et al. So community-engaged research goes by many names. There are a lot of people over the ages. I'm not going to really do the history part, but action research, community, participatory, partnership, collaborative inquiry. One of the principles of community-engaged research that I would say we live every day, those of us who do this kind of research, and that is that it's cyclical and iterative. It has to be. It is constantly revising, putting more data together, and I will allude to that when I talk about the projects that I picked out. So proceeds from partnership development and maintenance. There's that capital letter that wasn't supposed to be in there. I have looked forever to get that out of there. Through community assessment, problem definition, development of research methods, data collection, analyses, interpretation, through disseminating the results, policy implication, taking action, establishing mechanisms for sustainability. So a constant iteration, a constant cyclical. I think that's one of the reasons that it fits so well with community research, is because that's the way life is. It's a cycle of being born and living and dying, and the crops and the seasons, etc. So an important thing. Acknowledges that knowledge, so here's a fundamental, I think that it's critical to recognize. Acknowledges that knowledge is power, and thus knowledge gained can be used by all involved to all involved to direct resources, influence policies. So the community, this is the community side of things, has the potential to bridge the cultural gaps that may exist, overcomes the fragmentation and separation of the individual from his or her culture, empowerment, capacity building. Some people don't like to use that word empowerment anymore, or capacity building. We still use it because in some cases it's the very best words to use. Integrated approaches carried out with partners and focuses on community needs. And then these are just essentials that if you're working with communities, it's good to always remember, always to work on, always to practice. Mutual respect, being proactive, informed, reciprocity, or as our president says, reciprocal. I can't say it like he does, but he says, I love that word. Well, I love that word too. Reciprocity, mutually beneficial. Trust is critical, as Rob said. Listening, bi-directional communication and maintaining that communication. Respect partners' needs and wishes, discuss roles and responsibilities. So for the researcher stepping out of, it's not just doing research, it's a whole social relationship kind of building with a community of many people, many communities. When I tell you how many we're doing, it's a lot of communities. And benefits, and this I want to just emphasize the last one mostly, but community engaged research, or being engaged with the community, enhances the relevance, the usefulness, and the use of the intervention by all partners. And it joins together partners with diverse skills. I learned so much from the communities that we work with. Every day we're learning from the community. So it's partners, you're learning from each other, diverse skills, knowledge, expertise, and sensitivities to complex problems. And then improve the quality and validity of the intervention by engaging local knowledge based on the lived experience of the people involved. And the challenges, tension between fidelity and fit. That is probably the biggest research challenge. And that and the second one, even if you have a randomized controlled trial, if you tailor the intervention to match the community or fit the community, you lose the ability to have the power, the full power of generalizability to other audiences. You just can't take it and set it down somewhere else. And we do a lot of tailoring to make the intervention or the prevention strategies match the community that we're in. It's time and labor intense, and scholarly output may be reduced. Takes a lot of time to write papers and books and do all of that and give the feedback to the communities. And when you're spending a lot of time on the road and the effort, it just takes a long time. We've actually been pretty successful at balancing that and including the communities in the publications, but it's a challenge. It's a real hard balance. Meeting grant timelines, I don't even want to go there because NIH and CDC work on a whole different system than the communities that I work with. And getting things matched up is just a big challenge. Logistics, small size of the communities. I don't know how many grants I've had returned that says UE needed to have at least a population of 20,000, and I'm working with a population of maybe 1,000 or even smaller than that. And then soft money. So our research is funded by soft money, and it comes and goes, and sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's 3 years, and then it's gone. And you want to maintain the relationship with the communities and the research and the data collection, and it's very challenging. Okay, Prevention Research Center. We've been a PRC since 1995. We're one of 26 in a network across the country. all at academic centers, all work with communities with a population. And I was delighted to see our signers here today. One of the centers is in Rochester, and their population is the deaf population, and they have translated telephone-based surveys into video surveys for the deaf so that the deaf can be included in national databases. I get chills when I think about it, and there are always signers at all of our meetings that come and sign because they bring their members of their group or deaf. I'm going to just kind of skip. We're a multidisciplinary team and staff. A lot of our researchers represent the communities that we work with. So they come from those communities. That adds to our understanding and commitment. And we work with rural mostly, and we do as rigorous a research as we possibly can. We think our communities deserve that. And since we're funded by taxpayers' money, we think that we need to do that. It's responsible. Here is our advisory committee and a few of our staff. We meet quarterly, and we have been for 25 years or more, not the same people. Well, one of us is the same person, but maybe not the others. And then we do a lot of education. These are some of our pipeline students that spent a summer with us, and thanks to a program that Rob had. So we really think it's important to have students. We always have a lot of students, not so much classroom as it is hands-on, in the field, doing the work. Our guiding principles for the PRC are the topics emerge from the community. It's inclusive, it's a partnership approach, culturally appropriate, respectful, builds on helpful traditions and customs. It's not saying what you're doing is wrong. It's saying what in what you're doing can be made to be healthier. Economically and geographically feasible, which is a challenge to actually make sure that it is feasible and not leave the community trying to pick up the pieces of something that we were overly ambitious about. Or that they can't carry on. It's not sustainable. Fiscally responsible, evidence-based, and the marriage of science and experience. Because experience plays a big role in how this is done and how the research is designed and carried out. Okay, so here's some examples from our work. And we have had a lot of grants, and I put some of the first, not the very first, but a couple of the first big NIH grants that we had, Heart, Lung, and Blood. And what I want to say about one reason I put this list up there, and there are a lot more that I could put up, and my colleagues have, if you talk to them at the reception, you'll hear them talk about their work as well. But we call this, let me point to it. This is the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And this is the great-great-great-grandmother. But each one of these have learned and built on what happened in those earlier ones. So we learned so much, and we established relationships, and we built a team or teams. And so it's really important. But I'm going to start with Pathways to Health. And this is, so these are the three. I'm going to have Pathways, and then Chile and Viva. And the reason those other words are out there is because that's the dissemination of those projects. So not only have the previous studies been folded into the new studies, but they've also been disseminated in a different format or with a different name a little bit for sustainability and dissemination. So, and Teresa will recognize this very well. Pathways. Pathways, here are the locations. They're across the country. was a very large NIH multi-site, multi-university, multi-tribe, 8-year, gazillion-dollar project. And so here are the participating nations, and I'm not going to read them. I just want you to get the sense of where they were. And these are the universities, and Heart, Lung, and Blood sponsored it. And one of the best things about it, you can read the details, but one of the best things, it's, I think, the only project where I've actually had a feasibility study funded by NIH. We had 3 years to develop the intervention, working with schools that were going to be in the study. Oh, how wonderful that is. And that was including the community in deciding what should go in, how we should actually design it and beta test it as well. And so that was from 93 to 96. And then the full scale, regular 5-year full scale, 2,000 students. And the purpose was to implement and evaluate a culturally appropriate school-based intervention to prevent obesity. And I think I've already said that, 7 nations. And this is how the communities were involved. Members of the research team were from the community, so we were a good mix. Formative assessment during those 3 years to find out what foods were acceptable, what foods people used every day, customary, where they got their foods, etc. And then family and community events. Local advisory groups, so each site had their own advisory groups, and I had the formative assessment I said. Committee representation, so we had a lot of committees and work groups, a lot of conference calls. You can imagine trying to get 5 universities. And if you can imagine New Mexico and Minnesota working together, and in Minnesota they say, oh, they'll answer those, you'll get 100% response. Everybody in Minnesota loves doing research. And we're going and we say, well, I hope we can get 3 people to answer. Because it's a difference in a culture, and I see Cindy there sort of laughing because she's from Minnesota, but there's a real difference in the culture among these universities and these 7 nations as well. There was a 7 nations committee, so members of those tribes worked together. They were like a steering committee. Now, when they were getting along, and they didn't always get along, Teresa might smile at that, but sometimes they had cultural differences, like whether women could do this work and couldn't do that work. And then contribution to and review of the intervention, and a feasibility study in 1 school in each tribal community during that first 3 years. Okay. The foundation were the cultural concepts, social learning theory, and priority risk behaviors that we identified. And we did a big chart with which ones could be addressed and should be addressed. And it was a social learning theory. So look at this closely, and I will say that even though it says environmental factors, we didn't go outside of the schools very much. It was mostly school-based. So we didn't do a lot of work with the grocery stores or any of that. But we did have the families. And then if you go back, well, I think the next slide will help. So back to the social, ecological. This was moving up. It was about social and family, so it was really, but it was still really individual-based. And these social learning theories, Bandera's work, that he developed his theory working with boa constrictors, so if that helps. Cultural concepts, these were some of the cultural concepts from the tribal groups that they contributed. Learning through observation and practice, from storytelling metaphorically, holistically, trial and error through play, cooperatively, and through reflection. And also through traditions from the tribes we were working with. This is I think the most important one is the younger involvement of younger generations and the concept of community. Well, they're all important. And this is a family event. We had family events, very, very popular. And when I say family, it's generations of family. It's not, so when we were first doing our layout of our curriculum, of our intervention, and we got to the family piece, somebody that was working with us drew this mama and daddy and brother and sister and a nice little family. And I said, we need to keep adding more. The families are not exactly just mom and dad and 2 kids. American Indian Games were important as part of the physical activity. This is a great race based on a story, actually from the plains from Dakota. I just showed this slide because I love that dog. I just okay. And the teachers contributed a lot to, actually they were teaching it, but they contributed to helping to form it. Now keeping fidelity to it, and we did, I can guarantee you that if on Tuesday of the 14th of January, you called up any of the sites and said, what page are you on in the curriculum, they could tell you. We had good adherence to the curriculum and fidelity to the intervention. Okay, we had a shared vision. The picture has nothing to do with it, but if you notice, there are some horses. This is up in near Cortez, Colorado. And it was actually, there was a sign on the track at the school that said, no horses on the track. So I had to take the picture. Okay, this was our first big study that we wanted to disseminate, that we said, we've put so much work in it, and it's working so well, and it's so beautiful, and it's so user-friendly, and teachers love it. And so we actually got some money from CDC to disseminate it as PAL, which was physical activity for healthy lifestyles. And I will say that components of pathways are now in a project called PAC, which Teresa Clay from IHS has incorporated into some of the trainings that they do around the country for IHS, and also that Linda Beltran works with her on. So this model is very crude. It's an early, see if I can see the date, '02. It had what was the purple is, this was pathways, and it was what we were trying to disseminate, and we used a website, trainings, presentations, manuscripts, articles, and the curriculum. And I just got an email this week from someone asking me if I could let them see some tool that we had used in that study. And that's a long time ago. And we still, and it's on our website, the PRC's website, and we still get downloads. But in the first few months, we had like 4,000, because there wasn't something developed for these populations. Okay, next study. We're in the home stretch. I told you, no death by PowerPoint. There's a wonderful reception waiting for us. So this is Chile, Child Health Initiative for Lifelong Eating and Exercise. And one of the things that we found out in Pathways was 3rd grade is almost too late. You really have to start young. And so Head Starts, it has the population that we would want to be engaged in this. And there are, let me go to the next slide. And it's 3 to 5 years old, and we worked with rural Hispanic. It was a randomized controlled trial. I may have another slide coming up. I need to be careful that I don't jump ahead. But it was built on Pathways, but it was made, it wasn't just watered down. It was developmentally appropriate to fit the populations we were working with. It was different populations. And so This one was the community. We had healthcare providers, grocery stores, bus drivers, everybody in the community and families and the schools and the teachers and the aides. So on the ecological model then, we would be, well, all of it. But starting to get into here because we worked with the grocery stores to have them stock the foods that we were recommending to the families. Then we'd have a family night, invite the healthcare providers. The healthcare providers would come, and then we're all on the same message about what we were doing. And the primary goal was to assess the efficacy. I don't need to go into that. The reason was that prevalence of overweight has increased, and childhood obesity is a risk factor. And obesity is costing $117 billion annually. And my husband looked at this and said, is that an old number or a new number? And I said, when you get into the billions, I don't care if it's an old number or a new number, but this is the old number. I don't know what it is now. And then social and psychological. 900,000 children are enrolled. 90% come from low-income households. So that was the piece I wanted to get to. Nested cohort, don't need to. I haven't tried to put a lot of the research stuff in it because I don't think that was the purpose of this. Environmental determinants of health. Increase physical activity. I mostly wanted to show these pictures because they're so beautiful. This is Laura Church and her family and her husband and kids. Big family intervention. So they're making a healthy salad and learning about healthy foods, and this is the grocery store. So this next slide is the dissemination piece of it. So after Chile was over, we said, all these Head Starts were saying, can we get Chile? How do we get Chile? It's so beautiful, we want Chile. And we had presented at a lot of the Head Start meetings. And so we got money, and we have people working on figuring out who we could get money from, and USDA through Health and Human Services funded Chile Plus. And Chile Plus is Chile, but with an expanded family component, because that's what USDA wanted, and we wanted it too. And so if you look at this is Chile, and this is Chile Plus, and it's still going. And if you want to know more, Patty Keene will be at the reception, and she has long blonde hair. And you can go up and ask her more about Chile Plus, because it's very robust. And the last one is Step into Cuba Viva Connects. And this is our PRC core research project. And it is about disseminating and implementing and scaling up. And it's promoting physical activity and employing a community-university partnership. So it's got them all in there. And it's environmental. And it's policy. And basically, Chile is our beta site. It's Cuba, New Mexico. And we've been following the community guide recommendations for physical activity. And there are 5 of those. And we've been adapting those and implementing. When I say adapting, so a lot of the research was done like in Atlanta or Boston or San Francisco. And it says, point of decision prompts, take the stairs instead of the elevator. Well, let me tell you, of the 166 small communities in New Mexico, there's not a lot of elevators or stairs. So the adaptation was to the context. So that's one of the things that we believe strongly and write about, is that we're finding from our research that when you put it into practice, when you bridge the gap and you take it to practice from your controlled trial with lots of money and lots of staff and lots of whatever, that you really look at the context and how do you adapt it without losing fidelity to the original research. So really, really important. So that's way up here. It's going to be. So these are the definitions of dissemination and implementation research. I'm not going to read them because we're really using a lot of time here, but it's really not trying to repeat the original research. It is studying how. How do you get it put into practice? How do you get it disseminated? How do you do that? Not, can I repeat that? It's not a replication. Although, we do have counters, electronic counters on the trails, and we are out there doing ped counts because the local community wanted to know, if we build these trails, are people going to use them? But the research shows that yes, if you create places. Sorry, I'm a little bit dry here. So the community of Cuba were concerned about now Cuba has about 800 people. The 500 people that have diabetes, they're on the register, and that's a catchment area. That's not just the Cuba area. They have their own dialysis center. And they said, we want to do something about that. And they came to us, and a disclaimer is that I live there, and I've been trying to avoid doing a project there all the time because then I go to the post office and have a lot of questions and things like that. I haven't really tried to avoid it, but I think you know what I mean. It's hard to do a project in your own community. So we said, well, we'll come and talk to you. These are some of the partners. A lot of different people around the table. And we talked, and we led them through, believe it or not, a logic model. And that was the most fun and the most helpful thing we could have ever done. And when we are still using this. This was 8 years ago. And we've tweaked it a little bit, and I'm not going through a logic model with you, but it's a tool that we kind of overlook for working with communities. And so the goals of Cuba, step into Cuba, you'll notice there's not anything about obesity in here or anything about diabetes or heart disease, but it's really about promoting a healthy lifestyle. So the guides, the recommendations are a lot about environmental and policy approaches, and campaigns and point of decision prompts, etc. So we adapted those, and since Cuba doesn't have a lot of those things like elevators and stairs and parks and YMCAs and everything, but it has wonderful public lands, national forest and BLM and other kinds of lands, no parks, no national parks, and so we designed a lot of things around getting outdoors and walking, and there's a historical tradition of doing that. Although now people are on their ATV. They're rounding up the cows on the ATV, or they're going from place to place. Not a lot of exercise in that. So getting back to some of the pilgrimages, some of the old traditions of walking and being outdoors. And then here's some of the activities: creating walkways, trails, sidewalks. It's a brand new sidewalk you see there. Guess who paid for that? Department of Transportation. Don't think about DOT for health. A lot of unusual partners. This is a park trail with families, special events. And the seniors going for their walk after bingo. I will tell one story, because people from the health department said I had to tell this story because I told it to them. So one of the communities we're working with is Tularosa, and they have the village owns 10 acres right next to the senior center. And so they're trying to get the seniors out, and they're mostly women, and they couldn't get them out. So they got the fire truck and the firemen to come up and park the fire truck at the very end of that 10-acre lot away from the senior center. And they told the ladies, and they're all ladies, I guess the guys are all, you know, gone. And they said, if you make it up to the fire engine, you can have your picture taken on the fire engine with the fireman. And guess what? They all did it. They all made it up to the fire truck. So no more stories, but I did tell that story. Christine. And then I do want to read these quotes, and then we're wrapping up here. These are some quotes. We're doing a lot of qualitative work, and so these are some of the quotes from the community members. It just is an inspiring, motivating thing to see people, 50 people out volunteering to pick up trash or build a trail in a community that you never saw volunteerism at all. And it's theirs. And we're measuring the heck out of it, and we'll have 10 years of data. So that's the beauty of the longitudinal data. When you see people out walking and stopping and talking, we have an increased sense of community, an increased knowledge. It's starting with individuals and building up momentum and spreading to become social change in the community. When I first started, there weren't many, but now there's lots of people who walk, both men and women. It just helps to see people walking all the time. People are walking because of the atmosphere. It's changing. People give other people incentives. And then the kiosk, the land was donated, the community built the trail, and there was a Sunday morning when some volunteer built the kiosk, and we're out on a Sunday morning, and the mayor, I said I wouldn't tell you more stories. Well, just this last one, since I started it. The mayor is out there on his front end loader, and he's putting this up, this kiosk. And he said, I bet the mayor of New York City isn't out on a Sunday morning on his front end loader putting in a kiosk for a trail for the community. And we said, no, but we have a better mayor than New York City. So family activities on the Fisher Trail, hikers. And I just wanted to show this map actually is near the senior center and the library. That's one of those is the librarian, the red hair lady right there, and some community volunteers. And they're putting boulders in front of the library, and there's a library loop trail now. If we can just figure out how to get rid of the prairie dogs. Now we're going to see the video. And it's very short, and I think you'll enjoy it, and then we'll be closing. Yes, I will tell a story. What I want to do is to say thank you to the health department for this video because they funded it. And they funded 5, and the videos are a major way of disseminating the information from the Viva Step into Cuba. And why do we call it Viva Step into Cuba? Viva is our name. Village Interventions and Venues for Activity. Step into Cuba is their name. This is a partnership, so we've got Viva as us evaluating it. Okay.
Sitting at the base of the Nacimiento mountain range, on the edge of the Santa Fe National Forest and near American Indian communities, the small village of Cuba, New Mexico is blessed with majestic views, rich multicultural traditions, and a diverse community. But like many other communities across the nation, Cuba is struggling with rising rates of unhealthy weight, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer.
And these diseases are preventable. Research shows that if people get out and walk and are physically active in any way, whether it's at worksite wellness or stretching for seniors, whatever it is that we do or help people to do, as long as they're physically active, they'll get healthier.
So Cuba area residents concerned with the health of their community began to consider ways to promote physical activity. Dr. Richard Kozol, a family physician here for nearly 40 years, helped launch and lead the effort.
We became aware that a lot of the evidence shows that physical activity can be more successfully promoted if it's done at the community level. And so a group of us met about 4.5 years ago to discuss a prevention project that would focus on that topic.
That brainstorming session 4.5 years ago has transformed into a major community-powered program, which aims to get more residents out on their feet. Step Into Cuba is providing more places for residents to walk, better and safer access to those places,
Okay, let's see if you can keep this up.
and the motivation and support many residents need to get active.
Well, first and foremost, we're trying to create places where people can be physically active, and we're trying to provide information about those places that will attract people to use them for their
So
health.
this is their action.
The U.S. Task Force on Community Preventive Services recommends a number of evidence-based strategies to increase physical activity, and Cuba is tailoring many of these strategies to their program, including creating a community-wide promotional campaign to promote more physical activity, creating access to more safe places to walk, like new hiking and park trails, offering residents individually tailored walking programs, creating walking groups and other social support programs that motivate residents to become physically active, and designing streets and sidewalks to make walking through the community safer and more enticing. This multi-pronged approach is made possible by community volunteers, as well as unique partnerships with state, local, and federal governments, community health organizations, the local school system, and others.
Projects like this, you're right, do not happen on their own. This has been a collaboration of partners within the community and outside of the community.
That includes the University of New Mexico Prevention Research Center. The center is helping Step Into Cuba apply evidence-based strategies to the Step Into Cuba program, and PRC researchers are studying the effectiveness of those strategies after they're implemented.
So we've been doing qualitatively interviews with community members, with people on the Step Into Cuba Alliance there in the community, and also with walking groups. And then we've been doing quantitative measures looking at, are people walking more? Do you see people out on the streets in Cuba?
Researchers then share what they learned with the community, allowing them to fine-tune or change programs as needed.
You have community members who want to know if what they're doing is making a difference. I mean, they're interested in it as well as us as researchers. They want to know for their own health in their community.
Step Into Cuba organizers, the State Department of Health, and UNM researchers also want to share their novel approach with other New Mexico communities, which could use the Cuba model to make their own residents more active and healthier.
And so as an academic partner, that's what we're, prevention research centers at least, researchers are skilled at doing, is evaluating these kind of projects and giving that feedback to the community, as well as sharing it now, as in this video series that we're doing with other communities that can learn about resources, what works and doesn't work, and then they can move forward. So you better do it. There's actually 5 of these videos, one on each of the components, but this is the overview. And we've used them, and they have fact sheets that go with them, and have so it's part of a training package. And okay, so doing it so that other communities could learn about it. Well, guess what? We are now in Viva 2, which is called Viva Connects, and that's funded for. We're now in our end of our. Well, we have 2 more years. We're going to be reapplying soon, I guess, and. So scaling it up, and we're in, it's a collaborative network. We are in 31 other communities. Here's just some of them. And it's rural communities. I'm gonna have another little sip of water. So throughout New Mexico, rural, all over the state, a little more in some areas. Some of the areas you don't see any little things, it's because there are not any people living there. So this is Rambling Round Raton. They all have their names. And this is Thule Trails on the Fiddler's Green. So taking the components that fit their communities, we do technical assistance, we do evaluation, we do interviews, a lot of ways of documenting and studying, and it's mixed methods. We're doing quantitative and qualitative. And so just a couple of things about dissemination and implementation, because that's the kind of research we're doing now. So we went all the way from randomized controlled trials, developing an intervention and measuring it throughout with all kinds of measures and everything. And I'm not saying we don't still do that, we do. But now this is the emerging thing that we feel is very, very important, is getting these out into practice. So the scaling up is important. But this is from the literature, that elements of success, that engaging the target community where you're trying to disseminate the information and implement, tailoring to the local context, using participatory approaches, using evidence-based strategies, working with champions, and having adequate infrastructure, political will, and advocacy for the intervention. I will say that of all of those, that's the hardest in New Mexico communities, having adequate infrastructure. It's really challenging, as anybody in here in this room doing it knows. Building on a community academic partnership is the one that we think is critical, is important. It's really hard for communities by themselves, and we can't do and wouldn't do the research by ourselves. Employing culturally appropriate strategies and using approaches that fit the local context and place characteristics. We're talking about topography, land ownership, population clusters, existing roadways, on and on and on. And then the university community partnership, mutually beneficial relationship, bi-directional communication, sharing of expertise and knowledge, sharing and presenting and publishing, and celebrating joint accomplishments. We have a lot of big celebrations. And sharing common goals and values. The health of the community is usually number one, prevention of disease, the interest in outcomes, and the increase in self-efficacy and capacity building is important. And the challenges to science, I gave a few of those before, but tension between fit and fidelity, questions regarding generalizability, time, distance, approval process. Approval process is, maybe that should be at the top. A lot of IRBs to go through. And important to do, but takes a lot of time. Distance, we have teams going out every day, and they leave at 6 in the morning, and they may spend the night in Silver City or someplace out in New Mexico's a big state. And then a history of working with academia is negative for a lot of communities. They have been burned, or they perceive that they are not particularly ready to cozy up with the university. So that's a challenge to researchers. And then sustainability is with the community as well as for researchers. And then publishing, I said that earlier. And, push to get things done that, we're trying to do it, and standardized approach is viewed as lack of flexibility. Communities are used to, let's do this, and we have to finish this with this plan in place. Working with other tribes and communities with different values while trying to create a standardized intervention is a big one. And tension within a community, traditional values versus other values. So one community we worked in did not like, although they were all of the same ethnic group, did not like our stories about the historical beliefs because they belong to a different belief now, and we were caught off guard by that. And that's a beautiful scene. Come hike on the trails in Cuba with us. And those are some resources. We try to make lots of resources. We do walkability workshops, HIAs, health impacts assessments, et cetera, and try to make those available. We have apps, we have websites, we have a lot of things. And that's a lovely view of the Continental Divide Trail. And I'll close with, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Thank you, and we may have a little time for questions. Questions? I think everybody heard about the good hors d'oeuvres that are next door. Okay, if there are no questions, you can stop us later or send me an email. Okay. I think that's it. Okay. Okay. Should I go back?
Good evening, everybody. As Rich mentioned, my name is Monica Kowal. I'm the Director of Community Engagement Initiatives in the Office of the Provost, and I also serve as a Professor of Practice in Civic and Community Engagement at the UNM Innovation Academy. Thank you for being here tonight. It has been such an honor and a privilege to hear Dr. Davis discuss her work and to celebrate the magnitude of her scholarly contributions both to the University of New Mexico and to New Mexico's broader communities. I also want to recognize and thank the many community partners who work with Dr. Davis and her team to improve health outcomes for the people of this state. I know that a few community partners have obviously made it to this celebration, and I know that if we were to try to pack all of the community partners into this room, we probably would be standing room only. So I want to acknowledge those people who were able to make it this evening from around the state. And please indulge me for a moment while I take some time to thank those at UNM who supported the creation of this award more than 3 years ago and who have worked diligently to sustain it. Virginia Scharf, Mike Dewar, the former Vice President for Research, obviously Dr. Lopez, Dr. Trifenia Pil-Edie, and Dr. David Hansen, and all of the members of the Research Policy Committee. Nearly 20 years ago, the Kellogg Commission on the Future of State and Land-Grant Universities issued a widely acclaimed report titled Returning to Our Roots, the Engaged Institution. Even today, that report is a valuable tool for all of higher education, not just land-grant universities, in that it challenges institutions like the University of New Mexico to ensure that their teaching, research, outreach, and service functions become and remain even more sympathetically, purposefully, and productively engaged with their communities. As evidenced by Dr. Davis's presentation this evening, and by the work of the faculty, staff, students, and community partners who do engaged work across this campus, it's clear that UNM has a long and distinguished history of responding to the needs and challenges of the communities that we serve. It is my hope that the creation of this award and the very special purpose it serves in celebrating this achievement continues into years to come. We have a capacity to engage. There are issues before us on which we must engage. Our communities, states, nations, and the world are faced with great political and societal challenges, and it is both an institutional and a moral imperative that UNM be part of the solutions. Universities as a whole need to make engagement a pervasive expectation, and we must celebrate our engagement achievements in a whole range of ways that the Academy does so well, such as this award. I am eager and excited to be working with the Office of the Vice President for Research and the Office of the Provost and the President and so many other departments and colleges on campus to ensure that we continue to measure our progress and impact and gather lessons learned for future applications. Every day I come to work at this institution, of which I'm an alum. I went to undergraduate here, and I'm amazed and inspired by the creativity and excitement generated by the faculty, staff, and students. But I close by adding that engagement requires leadership. I mean leadership from regents, from chancellors, from legislators, presidents, provosts, deans, chairs, visible leadership and participation in this conversation. The university as a whole will respond to the engagement challenge when engagement is not only principle, but continued practice. No matter how passionate one might be about community-engaged scholarship, it cannot become institutionalized without a greater capacity to embrace and support it. By capacity, I mean the ability, the humility, and the will to look beyond our walls within the academy, to embrace and partner with individuals, groups, and organizations such as Sally Davis and her team have done from across all sectors, who are also our peers and who are also experts in their field, to address the critical issues of our times. So with that said, I would now like to welcome Vice President for Research, Gabriel Lopez, back to the podium to present the award to Dr. Davis. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kowal, and thanks very much, Dr. Davis, Professor Davis, for a wonderful lecture and for sharing with us just a glimpse of your incredible body of work. It was fascinating. I would like to thank the Faculty Senate's Research Policy Committee for doing the hard work of selecting this year's Community Engaged Research Lecture Award winner. It's really a difficult decision. We have a lot of very important work that's going on related to community engaged research, and it's a difficult choice, but clearly it was a very apt choice to have Dr. Davis speak with us tonight. I'd also like to thank the folks in my office, the Office of the Vice President for Research, for organizing all of the events today and for doing such a great job in putting together a very nice event. I'd like to now invite Professor Davis up to receive her award, and I think it's around here somewhere. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Please come to this side. So I get to pose with Dr. Davis here. Please stay. So with this, I'd like to also personally thank you for the great work that you're doing in northern New Mexico. I'm from northern New Mexico myself and really appreciate your work. Thank you. So thank you all for attending tonight's lecture and for honoring the achievements of Professor Davis. As was mentioned, there is going to be a very nice reception with, for the first time I think, live music in the lobby in Minachie West. I believe that the music will be, as Dr. Davis mentioned, the magic guitar of Arturo Montoya. I'm really looking forward to that. And finally, let's please all give Dr. Davis a final round of applause for his job. Thank you all very much. Rich? Dr. Williams, could you come up? Apparently there's more posing to be done. Monica, do you want me to turn it off?
I guess this makes us poseurs.
Thank you, Laura.
No,
You're very welcome.
You guys did a great job.
Thank you. Minus, this computer was giving us a hard time. Sorry, I'm trying. I'm working on it.
You did all the hits for the film. I'm like excited.
Sorry, let me. I don't want to go.
Let's go further back.